Hello and welcome to Psychatog, the iconic control deck that uses this creature. So Psychatog is an amazingly iconic card with that artwork, and we can discard cards and eat things from the graveyard to make it bigger and bigger. But before we get into that, you might have noticed that the background of my videos have changed. So I did a poll asking you guys which you prefer, the wood or the brown paper, and it seems like almost all of you prefer the wood. So please do let me know in the comments below what you think now you actually see it in a video. It really helps the channel, and of course I want to make videos that you guys like watching. You can also vote in this poll by checking the community tab of my channel. So thank you for all the feedback, it really helps. And let's get back into the video. So Psychatog is the perfect control creature because it goes along with exactly what control decks want to do. We want to draw as many cards so we can have all the answers, and then in the late game we can convert that into damage with the Psychatog. So the kind of card draw that we're using, of course, we have the iconic Fact or Fiction. We have Gush, which is excellent as it can always give us +3 cards in our hand when we return those 2 islands. And we're also playing Accumulated Knowledge. Now, most decks would play Impulse in this slot. However, for Psychatog, we don't really mind so much about the card selection. We're mostly looking for just having a lot of cards in our hand, which a late game Accumulated Knowledge or 3 or 4 really can do. It just gives us that critical mass of cards to discard and eat. And of course, no control deck would be complete without counterspells. We have the classic counterspell, Mana Leak, and in this case Circular Logic, which can be great with Madness and discarding it to Psychatog, and it can often be just a 1-mana counterspell because we have so many cards in our graveyard. Although sometimes it can be a little weak, but overall it's a very good card in this deck. Another option is Miscalculation, which I really like in these kind of decks because it's still potent in the early game as you can still counter stuff. People who play around counters, they always play around Mana Leak anyway, and you can cycle it in the late game if they've just got so many lands that it's not doing anything and you need a new card. And of course it wouldn't be a black deck without Duress. Duress is super powerful and one of the best cards in the format. This not only takes the best non-creature, non-land card from their hand, it also gives us the information so we know exactly what's coming up and what we need to counter and what they're doing. It can also help us to protect our Psychatog later on. And we have a whole lot of options for removal because we're playing black. This deck usually plays a selection kind of spread out over 3 different cards. The most common are Diabolic Edict and Smother, and then we usually play 1 extra card as well, whether it be Terror, Ghastly Demise, Vendetta, or Funeral Charm, which also has some other useful options too. So for creatures, we've already talked about the Psychatog. It's the perfect control threat, but we also have the option to play Shadow Mage Infiltrator. Not all of the decks do, it really just depends on what you like. Some decks play 4, some play 2, some don't play any at all, but this can really help us with drawing more cards while putting a little bit of pressure and also being able to block. We also have a one-off wonder that can give our Psychatog flying in those few games where we don't have the time and we just need to get in for a big hit in one go. So the options that this deck has are mostly just different removal or draw spells, and the most common by far would be Intuition because it works really well with things like Wonder and Accumulated Knowledge. But I've also seen some super spicy lists playing Standstill, which is an excellent card in control lists, and the classic Upheaval, which it is a little slow for Premodern, but there is definitely still a place for those of you who love that card. I know that I still do. And so for lands, we're playing all of the black-blue lands you'd expect. We're also playing Darkwater Catacombs. I don't really like those filter lands, but it does its job. It gives us the mana that we need. And actually, surprisingly enough, Psychatog decks generally don't play that many lands, and they also don't play any of these kind of specialty lands, which is actually a bit of a surprise to me because I feel that some lists they could probably fit some of these in, even with a relatively lower land count. But obviously we do still have quite a few color requirements. The one specialty land that these decks do regularly play is Cephalid Colosseum, and that's because it works amazingly well not only with Psychatog, but also with Circular Logic, to draw and discard the counterspell, and it can just generally fill up our graveyard and give us some extra cards. So they usually do play a 1 of or 2 of these. And for the sideboard, you have everything you'd expect in a blue-black deck. All the staples are here: Blue Blasts, Annul, Engineered Plague, Dystopia, and we do generally run Nevinril's Disc, and that's because the main deck doesn't have any sweepers, and we're mostly just relying on 1-for-1 removal. So those sweepers really help us in the sideboard. So the game plan for this deck is essentially to just stick a Psychatog and then back it up with counterspells, removal, and card draw. Now, depending on the matchup you're in and what you're playing against, you may want to do this as early as turn 3 and try to start beating them down and putting the pressure on, or you may want to wait much longer until you've got a lot of resources and extra mana to back it up with a lot of counterspells in the same turn. Also, generally speaking, you don't want to pump the Psychatog unless you absolutely have to, either to save it from burn spells, or if you have enough to go all in and kill your opponent in one go. Ideally, you'll have a Wonder in there as well, but it's definitely not needed. So some strategies are very good against this deck, and you can see that reflected in the sideboard. Burn is very strong because when we tap out, they can just burn our face. Also, go wide strategies, as the removal in a Psychatog deck tends to be very 1-for-1 in the main deck, and also artifacts and enchantments. Once they're in play, it's basically impossible for us to remove them. So humility, it really can shut our deck down, and we need a Dystopia to take that one out. We're firmly a control deck here, however we're not 100% control because sometimes the Psychatogs can go on the early beatdown and just tempo our opponents out. It really does depend on the matchup. For the strengths of this deck, it has a range of tools and it has the options open to it to beat anything. It has a lot of synergy in what control decks are trying to do, plus what the Tog does, and it's quite customizable. It's also very good on a budget. The weakness is it does require format knowledge. You need to know what you're doing. Burn decks, go wide decks, and artifacts and enchantments once they're in play. So here's an example list, and as always, I do recommend you check out TC decks. If you like this video, please do like, comment, subscribe, and let me know about the background in the comments. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.